I just have a few questions that I wanted to run through with you all and give us some context about the landscape and help to understand from your expertise how CPG companies should really be thinking about themselves and their own positioning and branding. So each of you plays a role in supporting startup founders and businesses in various ways. What have you identified through your experiences as the biggest hurdles that CPG founders face in attempting to scale or launch their businesses? And Jennifer, I would love to hear from you first. Your thoughts on that.
Well, I knew you were going to pick on me first. I think the biggest challenge that I find is innovators, people who've developed products really struggle with in a scale, how they go from an innovator to a leader. How do they think about their culture development? How do they focus on what they need to do to expand their team? It's not just about scaling the product, but really scaling the team. And oftentimes they get very focused on scaling the product and find themselves in deep trouble when it comes to scaling and leading their team.
Thanks, Jennifer. And Allison, would love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, so I agree 100% with Jennifer. I had a couple of things on my list for this question. One was having the right team in place, and two was developing their leadership skills. Absolutely fundamental to being able to scale. I think, normally when we think about, well, what are the two biggest barriers to scaling? The first thing that usually comes to mind is money. And then the second one that comes to mind is time. But really what enables you to move both of those forward is your team and your ability to lead. And then I would add to that a third one, and that is discipline and focus. And which as innovators, by nature are so creative, they're always wanting to move on to the next thing and develop and create. But having the ability to discipline yourself and to remain focused is exceptionally hard, but it is the key to being able to be successful when scaling a business.
Thanks, Allison. And Jane, what have you seen through your experiences as some of the biggest hurdles that CPG founders face when launching or scaling their businesses?
Yeah, so I come a little bit obviously from the marketing influencer marketing side. So I think what I see is like when you first launch your first product, you get maybe a one-hit wonder, but as you start to launch more SKUs or after you get through year one, it's like how do you stay relevant? How do you stay within the conversation? And I think it is beyond just your product, but also as a founder is how do you continue having this conversation about your company, but also yourself, and being able to use your personal branding is something that I don't see a lot of founders do because they don't want it to be about me. But I think that you can really easily use that as a tool. And I've obviously seen that through my own platform, right? That I launched through A Taste of Cocoa is I developed this personal branding for 10 years, not knowing that was a thing, right? And I have launched product along the way, but now all leveraging my brand now through even things like angel investing. So that's kind of what I've seen. And I think that's super important as you get through year one, but especially as you launch more SKUs, and especially if you're in stores, just even hearing it from store marketing is your product is not going to sell by itself on the shelf. Like you have to market it so it will move.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And that's actually a perfect segue into my next question, which is talking about the differentiation and necessities between personal branding, so a founder's own personal brand, and then company branding. Why do founders need to establish their own brand narrative alongside their company narrative? And Jennifer, I'd love to hear from you first.
Well, when it really comes down to it, investors are really looking at the person first and then looking at the product, because oftentimes the product they have, there's some level of competition. And so there's other choices for them in that product space potentially. Can they connect with that person? Do they have a very clear understanding of what their vision is, what their mission is, who they are, and how it relates to how they want to lead the company going forward? Because at the end of the day, we're banking on the person and not just the product. And so we really look at how does that person come across, and do they have a clear narrative of who they are, what they believe in, and how they are going to act as a leader.
That makes complete sense. And I think, running Beam Angel Network and having conversations with investors, it's been such a big learning for me that, a majority of the reason, 50% or more of the reason why investors at such early stages will take a chance on a company is because of the founder and their ability to be able to carry a vision forward. So that's a great point. Allison, I would love to hear from you. What are the differences between traditional and kind of new marketing, and how do founders develop branding and positioning strategies in a thoughtful way?
All right. Okay, so it's obviously no surprise to anyone on here that things have changed dramatically in terms of how we communicate and the opportunities to not only market our products, but to develop and market our own brand as leaders, as founders. And when you think back on the way things used to be many years ago, which really wasn't that long ago, the biggest difference is the limited number of channels that we had in order to get our message out. And so it was very much, focused on the big three: radio, television, and print. And then from in terms of media channels, and then in terms of just thought leadership platform, it was conferences and maybe writing. And but now, because our communications ecosystem has become so fragmented, there are many different channels, both on the traditional side of media with radio, TV, and print. That has even become much more diverse from a channel standpoint. But then also there's social media. And as y'all know, it seems like every 6 months or so, there's like a boom and a new couple of platforms that develop that, certain segments are gravitating toward. And so what this is leading to is just a environment from a communication system where there's great segmentation across the board, which can either be overwhelming when you're trying to navigate that, or it can be empowering when you narrow down a niche and find where your target audience is, what channel they are gravitating toward. And then at the same time, there's also both paid and earned opportunities to communicate your message. So across all of those different channels, there are opportunities to elevate your visibility where you have to pay to play. And there are also opportunities where you can earn that coverage. And I think the bottom line, though, is that now with the new playing field that we're in right now, there's a lot of competition. And we are definitely in not only a communications environment where there are multiple channels and lots of segmentation, but we are in a just stage of existence where there are booming numbers of entrepreneurs. That is like the thing to do now. And so we have lots of entrepreneurs, lots of communications channels, and what that equals is lots of noise. And so in determining how to develop your brand and how to position yourself in a thoughtful way. So second part of your question, Aisha, most important thing is to find your niche. And this can be hard for founders and entrepreneurs, as we talked a little bit about earlier, because by nature, we like to flourish and we like to develop new things. And this is where it kind of goes back to focus. There's a gentleman named Blair Enns. He is the author of a book called Win Without Pitching, and he specializes in new business development. And one of the things that I've heard Blair say numerous times is that founders, business owners will say, I don't want to get pigeonholed. I don't want to get pigeonholed. And what he always says to that is, his response is, the pigeonholes are lined with cash. And the bottom line here is that when you find your niche, that is how you differentiate yourself. And don't be afraid to be hyper laser focused on something, because that is how you're going to go deep and how you're going to develop your expertise and have a really clear thought leadership platform. So that would be my bottom line in terms of like how to really stand out in this noisy system.
Allison. I just have a quick follow-up question to that, which is when folks are and founders are thinking about kind of which channels to dive deep into and either, you know, spend their time or their money putting effort behind that. What are some considerations that they need to make? Because to me, it seems like, well, if social media is this place that's oversaturated and there's a lot of noise there, maybe I should revert back to going the traditional methods of radio, TV, and print. So what are kind of the pros and cons of both sides?
I think you actually have to have a balance, and there needs to be a little bit of a mix there. And so on the social media side, I would say like pick 1 or 2 channels. Do no more than that. Don't try to spread yourself across everything. Pick 1, maybe 2. But I wouldn't, you know, especially early on. And while this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, while you're developing your team and your own leadership skills, your ability to lead your team so that they can operate your business while you're out there developing the thought leadership for the company. So, you know, pick 1 or 2 social media channels. And then I completely agree that you can't rely 100% on social media. There is, I think, a dire need to really hone in on finding a handful of groups, professional groups, industry groups that are within your ecosystem from a business standpoint that you get involved with. And so get involved with, volunteer, you know, become a part of a committee, and look for speaking engagements through the groups that you can get involved with.
Great, thanks so much. Jane, so you've been, you know, wildly successful with running A Taste of Cocoa. You've been running it for 11 years. Congratulations on that. And I think, you know, you having been in this space for so long, it'd be really interesting to hear from you. Now that you've worked with so many CPG founders, what are some ways that CPG founders can develop mutually beneficial relationships with influencers like yourselves beyond just typical social media advertising? Because I think that, you know, when Allison was mentioning kind of the oversaturation of social media, that's where I kind of see like a lot of like targeted and paid ads. But what are kind of ways beyond just a regular paid ad that founders can work with influencers?
I love something that Allison just said was ecosystem. And that's something that I also did not realize that I was building along this way. And I think until last year when COVID happened and it made all of us kind of stop, it made me stop and kind of reflect back on the 10 years. And like, I finally realized, I was like, wow, I actually have built a really strong ecosystem this entire decade that I just didn't realize. And it's just beyond the restaurant industry or small local business owners in Austin, but also this network that I've developed along the way. But I think about not just my website, my social media channels, when I launched merchandise, when I launched books that were in 50 locations in Austin. But it was also the power of my brand and my network. And I definitely saw that last year when I launched Hunter for Hospitality and we did $15,000, I think in 2 weeks to distribute 4,000 meals to laid off service industry workers. And again, I saw the strength of that again during the snowstorm. So during the snowstorm on day 2 of our nightmare that we all experienced throughout the city, I launched a new GoFundMe fund called Austin Winter Storm Relief. We actually ended up raising $160,000, which makes my initial pay last year seem very little. But we raised $160,000, have distributed close to 48,000 meals, and we fed all major hospitals. I even made a lot of these personal runs to the hospitals. And I think you don't realize the power of your brand and your network until you're literally in the hospital and the doctors all know who you are already. And they're just so stoked that Coco is actually making this personal delivery. And it's because I've had to support 50 restaurants, and most restaurants at that time could not even make deliveries because we were buying 300 to 400 meals at a time and nobody could deliver them. So me and my girl group, we were like, okay, I'll make the delivery today. We'll make it through the snow. I have a friend that has a Jeep. But I think in situations like this, for me, who were all the restaurant owners that I contacted Tuesday night? It was anyone that has supported me, and I'm like, who will open for me in the morning? Who can safely reopen? And I think when you think about social influencers, for me, like I get so many emails every single day from CPG founders or small business owners or just anyone who's like, hey, like just trying to shove their product or business in my face of like, hey, I have this, like how I want you to help me. But I think the conversation should be, what can I do for you because I have a need right now? And that doesn't come very often. It's very rare when I get a business owner who's like, hey, I'm working on this thing, but I heard that you're actively angel investing. Here, let me share with you some of my deals that I'm aware of. Or, hey, I heard you're building a new house. Do you need any help with interior design or, contacts with brand partnerships or anything like that? Who shows me that they are invested? And I think that goes so much more beyond than when a lot of CPG brands will ask me like, hey, how can we work with influencers? It's very expensive. How can I afford $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 for an Instagram post? And I'm like, it can go so much more than that if you're willing to foster a relationship, because it needs to be somehow mutually beneficial if you cannot pay the sponsorship fee. So those are just some ideas and thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. And you bring up a great point, which I think for me, when I speak with a lot of founders, a lot of folks will just kind of do the spray and pray method, right? It's like just reach out to a bunch of different folks, see what sticks. But it's really important for folks to do their homework on who they're, talking to and asking for help, and figuring out what it is that person is really passionate about, and how can I amplify their passions with my ask. So I think that's a really great point. Thank you. Jennifer, would love to go back to you and talk about how CPG companies can basically tap into various resources and a wide network for support and investment opportunities. I think CPG companies aren't limited to a lot of the opportunities that are available, like some sectors like the tech space. So how can CPG companies specifically kind of look beyond just the regular, or I guess not regular, but kind of the typical lines of investment or resource support, and kind of spread their wings and get more support?
Well, it comes down to a couple different things. One, you mentioned the tech space, and most often people think, oh, they only invest in tech. And if you start looking, particularly after the COVID pandemic, a lot more angel investment groups have started expanding into CPG or other things beyond tech. So don't think, oh, I tried them or I looked them up 2 years, 3 years ago, or some point in time. Always go back and be open to refreshing your list. And as Jane said, it comes down to how are you connecting with these individuals and looking at them. And a lot of it is asking who has been successful. So within the CPG community, looking at who's getting investment and where they're getting investment. That's a big piece of it. Also, post-pandemic, there have been a lot of companies that are now opening up grants, or they're opening up business loans, or they're opening up internships or programs where accelerators where CPG companies can now go into these programs. Oftentimes people tend to shy away from an accelerator program because they think, oh, it's going to be 6, 8, 12 weeks of work. They're going to want a percentage of the company. It's not going to be worth it. If you're looking at investment, one of the key rules is you're going to start giving away pieces of your baby or sharing pieces of your baby. So you've got to be open to potentially looking at those accelerator programs, because a lot of angel investors are going to be there looking or involved in those. And it's a great way to go beyond just your typical CPG focused VCs. The other thing I would say is the Small Business Association has had to completely change how they're looking at supporting small businesses. And so are banks. So the opportunity to get lines of credit or to get grants or loans at very reasonable rates are a lot like what you would see in angel investing in terms of your percentages and what you can get invest. And one of the things that I always tell founders is you've got to be open to the fact that it's not just going to be one investor that you're going to get. You've got to actually focus on what do you need in terms of funds, and recognizing most angel investment are going to be less than $150,000. Most of the time, they're $50,000 at best. And so it's, if you need 500,000, be prepared to go to 30 to get 10 people. And if you get a no, don't be shy from saying, I understand it's not a right fit for you, but is there someone else you might suggest I talk to? Because it really does come back to, as Jane said, how do you show up in terms of your networking, and how do you reach out to your group? And that's a big piece of it. The other thing that I want to add on to what Allison said, when you're picking your channels, it's great to have one or two specifically for your company, but make sure you're showing up somewhere as a person and as a leader in a channel. Whether it doesn't have to be Instagram, it could be LinkedIn, it could be on Twitter, it could be in a blog attached to your website, wherever. But every time an investor is going to get a briefing book, they're going to go and want to see more about you just than a brief bio. So be mindful of that. But it's also great for your customers as well, because as you're, whether you're on the shelf or you're direct to consumer, a lot of it's going to be about, do they know you and do they know what you believe in? Because everyone does research today. It's just too easy to access. And if you don't have a presence, then you're not likely to convince someone to buy into you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to go a little bit off the script here because I would love to briefly talk about Clubhouse. Do y'all have experience with Clubhouse? I know it's the hot new social media platform right now, but if y'all have experience with Clubhouse, I would love to hear from you if you've heard of founders being successful in like leveraging that platform or kind of these new platforms. I know Twitter's coming out with something similar. I think it's called Spaces. But you know, we have these, there's almost like the traditional marketing. There's this new group, which is like Instagram, LinkedIn, and then there's this newer group that's coming out, you know, in the past couple of years. Do you all have any kind of thoughts of how founders can utilize these even newer platforms to amplify themselves or their brands?
I feel, go ahead, Jane.
Okay, I've spoken in a couple of chats, and one of the really successful ones was actually through my talent agency. So I signed with a talent agency in 2017 who manages all my contracts for brand partnerships. And during this like tricky like last 15 months, I've been pushing my agency to be strategic and more active in getting basically ad leads with ad agencies. And so one of the things we did last year was do a huge like Zoom meeting on like the state of influencer marketing. And we were able to like gen lead, I think maybe 200 ad agencies that sat in and brand partners that sat in on that. When we did the Clubhouse, we did it, I think, with another organization called Women in Influencer Marketing. And it was a huge room. We actually had 500 people, I think, jump in during that time. Well, I personally didn't get like as many, I don't think I got any leads per se, but it was more so for my agency that I'm signed with to get that visibility. So then ad partners would then reach out to them, then bringing me opportunities. But I think that this is a missed opportunity for founders, and specifically CPG founders, is to be active on Clubhouse and look at certain rooms that are maybe talking about, you know, vegan products are coming on shelf or other food trends that that I know I'm not aware of. But being active in those conversations, but also being active in, like, I've seen a lot of like investing or fundraising chats, and I think it's a great way because I think angel investors in general are using this tool to see like what is coming on market, right? Maybe you're because there's so many like budding brands that people are not aware of or investors are not aware of. So I think it's a great way and a missed opportunity that I know a lot of founders are not looking into. And it's, while Clubhouse is on the rise, I will also say that it's still not super saturated yet. So it's a great way to stand out beyond Instagram or TikTok. And I think especially with the investors behind Clubhouse, they're really wanting this to be very much, you know, a networking opportunity. Like I actually had dinner with one of the partners of Andre Horowitz and they're a major investor in Clubhouse. And so they have a lot of really big plans for this platform.
Great. Jennifer, I think you had a comment too.
I was just very similar, that it's another channel you can leverage. And in particular, what I'm finding with Clubhouse, it is a great opportunity to show up who you are as a person and really get your personal brand along with just your product, because a lot of the conversations are much more focused on that aspect. And it goes a really long way if you can get something out there in a new channel that way.
Yeah, and my only follow-up to that is just to clarify one thing that I said earlier. When I mentioned 1 to 2 platforms, I was, like Jennifer said, I was talking specifically for the founder's thought leadership platform, because it may make sense as a brand to have, to be on multiple channels, because of the different segmentation. But as far as Clubhouse and some of the newer platforms go, I say my whole approach to that is experiment and just be open to it. And, and I think one thing that can be helpful when you are experimenting with a new platform is if you have an opportunity to do something with a partner, like Coco was saying, participating in something with Clubhouse as part of a larger group, that can be very beneficial because it helps to elevate the profile when you may be a newcomer to it.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for entertaining my off-script question. All right, so Allison, as founders start to seek external funding for their companies and go beyond just bootstrapping, what are some strategies that you've seen work for founders to get investor attention?
Well, I'm going to talk about a few things that we've heard today. So some of this we've already discussed, but I think this is really where it goes back to first, really having a very well-defined niche, a very clear, unique selling proposition, and a succinct, articulate elevator pitch. So, having those 3 kind of fundamentals in place is key. And then from there, looking for speaking opportunities in particular. And I think that this is really where speaking engagements have an edge over traditional, or I'm calling it traditional now, social media, because this is where the founder really has an opportunity to express their expertise, their passion, their energy, and to connect human to human. And at the end of the day, that is ultimately what it's all about. Really being able to elevate yourself, your visibility as a human being, which it's very hard to do that on social media sometimes, especially, when it's written content, which great way to express your thought leadership and to communicate your niche and your unique point of view. But people have very short attention spans. They're maybe not going to read that entire article. But if you have an opportunity to speak, to have a platform where you can audibly communicate with your audience and they can see you and they can, feel your passion and really get a firm sense of what your unique point of view is and how that fits into your niche and how that, really just becomes the foundation for you as a founder. That is where I have seen a lot of founders really flourish with investors.
Great, thank you. Jennifer, do you have anything to follow up on that? I think your experience as a seasoned angel investor, it would be great to hear from you.
Speaking engagements are important, or places where you can get your platform out there are always good. One of the things that I say is if you have a targeted list of angels, reach out to them, whether it's on LinkedIn or if you have their email, and make it interesting for them. Show them that you've got something that you know about them that connects back to their company, or your company rather. Anything you can do to make yourself stand out and make the angel investor know you know something about them, or if it's an investment group, for example, take Beam, knowing that there's a focus on rising up minority founders. Like if you're a minority founder saying, hey, I'm one of these and this is why I really want to be a part of Beam. Anything you can do in your general communication to someone to show that you've made the investment of time, makes a big difference. I will read those emails or those communications more than just a general, hey, I hear you're, a part of meme, or I hear you're an angel investor, or you're part of portfolio, or whatever it is. I'd like to talk to you about my product. I'm more likely to say, okay, they've made an investment of time, I'll make an investment of time.
Thanks. And final question before I move on to questions from the audience. So Jane, would love to hear from you. What are some real world examples of founders that you've seen succeed in positioning themselves in their companies? Maybe some that you've worked with through your platform.
Yeah, so the first one that comes in mind for me is Dan at Notamu. So we've known each other from a distance for many, many years. And I'll say last year when I did 100 for Hospitality, I had a ton of brands, but also restaurants that are reaching out to me. And I think he just knew, he's like, I know she's super busy. She has no time. So he had his team just ask me directly, like, what is your restaurant schedule drop list? Instead of like throwing all this product at me, because a lot of companies were like, can we ship a pallet of product? And I'm like, no, I don't have time to go distribute this product. Like, I'm coordinating hundreds of reservations to pass out food. And so what Notamu did, and then they even got Eastsiders on board very quickly, and it was very seamless, is they dropped off product every single day to each restaurant that was distributing food that day, and it just made it super easy. And because they did that, then I went out of my way to shoot a ton of content, gave them all the recognition that they needed. And then he, as a founder, even then did a personal donation to the fund. And I think that just like goes so much way beyond. Another brand I want to brag about is Gold, which is a Black-owned beauty brand. They're actually based out of New York City. And the founder knew about the Texas storms that we were going through, and I actually angel invested in this company pretty earlier this year, and it was unexpected for me to actually see on social. I just happened to see it across my feed because my Instagram was completely flooded during the days of the snowstorm as I was doing so much, kind of fundraising outreach to raise funds. But they donated 100% of proceeds for 4 days from Gold to Texas relief efforts. And I think that just goes so much more beyond. And it was, she didn't even email me. Like, they just posted on social, and then they made a huge donation. And I think situations like that just speak so loud that I will remember, a lot of the people that all stepped in during this time, that especially also knew, like, hey, she's really busy. She's probably very overwhelmed right now. Let me do something in the background that I know that can just make her life a little easier. Because I did miss a lot of emails. I missed a lot of DMs of many people that were wanting to help, but it was just such a stressful time. But I think when I think about Austin in particular, I think founders that are outspoken, that contribute to the community. I think about the Yellowbird founders. I think they're very active in the community, which, it's just a good reminder of, the company that they're building, but also it feeds back to the brand. I know I'm missing a lot of founders right now that I can't remember, but I think that aside from thinking about your product and the SKUs and the market launches that you have, like, again, Austin is so community focused, and I think it's so important to give back to community because people remember and people notice. And I think that's what makes our city so unique.
Yeah, agreed. All right. So it looks like we have a couple questions, or maybe one question from the audience. Amanda asked, if we're focusing on just a few social platforms, should we remove accounts on platforms that we are not as active on so they don't appear out of date or undeveloped?
I think I'll comment on that real quick. If it's a platform that you have not developed a following on, I think that and they're not expecting anything out of you. I don't think that there's any harm in just going silent if you have not been nurturing that. The one thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to lose your handle. And that's the one just kind of technical thing about it, that you can hold on to your handle while not feeding it content, and that's fine. If someone goes there and if you start noticing people going to that channel and maybe starting to gravitate toward you, then maybe that's your signal that you need to start paying more attention to it. But that's just my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, and I would just throw in, you to keep your handle, the one thing is tell them where they can go find you. So
Yes.
it's easy to put a simple message that says, hey,
Great
go
point.
find me on X or Y, because then people will go gravitate to that.
Got it. Thanks. There was another question. Jane, can you just summarize really quickly the companies you just mentioned? There was Not a Moo, and then there was Gold. How do you spell that?
Gold with an E at the end. And she is about to launch, and I think all Targets. So super exciting. I don't think they're in the Targets in Austin yet. I've been kind of keeping my eye out. I also mentioned Yellowbird. I can't remember anything else I said.
Yeah, it was those three. Okay, awesome. Thanks. If we have any other questions from the audience, please drop them in the chat. Otherwise, we can wrap up. All right. So I have one. Oh, looks like we have one more. How important is it for the founder to work on the startup full time? And for those that are working on a project while still having a full-time job, how would you recommend managing the leadership positioning of the image with the image of an employee? So let's try to address that first first question first. So how important is it for the founder to work on the startup full time? Jennifer, any thoughts?
I'll start off on that one. It's not important if I know the person is committed to making the business successful. You still have to pay your bills. If you have a family, you still need to take care of your family. It's not necessarily having a full-time job. You could have multiple part-time jobs, or you could be working on this while you're taking primary caretaker. So for me, I'm looking at it more from what is your path forward to get to the point where the company would sustain you, to where you could focus on it full time? And do I believe that's a reasonable time frame for you to get there? Because that shows me that you're focused and you're committed to making it successful while still balancing the practical world of having a life. And then on the second piece, your leadership isn't so much about being an employee or full time. Your leadership is about you and how you're showing up. If it's whether working on the product or working on the company or working with, if you have someone that you're partnering with or working with, that's all in how you as a person show up. And so it's not so much about whether or not you're full-time as an employee or a part of an employee, but how you are showing up.
I have one comment on that. The way I read the last part of that, and I could be wrong here, but the way I read the last part of that question was if you are still an employee for another company while you're working on your startup. So let's just talk about that, because that is very often the case. And so I would say first thing is, does your company that you're working for know that you have the startup? Because that is key. If you are ready to start elevating your visibility as a founder, but you're still employed by someone else, you need to make sure that your the company that you're working for is aware of this side gig that you have and what you're doing with it, and your commitment to continue, and your plan on how you're going to continue fulfilling your role for the company that you're working for. And just so that they are completely clear on what your intentions are and what you're doing. So that is first and foremost. And then, so assuming that the company that you're working for is supportive of what you're doing over here on the side, then I think, again, that is part of your story. And you have to be transparent about that, because the last thing that anyone is going to want is to find out a surprise about you. They don't want to be surprised. Investors don't want to be surprised. And so just incorporating that that is part of your story. And that is what is going to shape the way you develop your business. So don't be shy about incorporating that into your story and making it a positive part of your story, assuming that you already have that blessing from the company that you're working for.
Great. I see another question from Jessica, which is one thing that you wish someone told you on your adventure to starting a small business. Related, my last question for you all was going to be, what is your top tip for founders to basically, help to amplify themselves and their businesses and rise above the fray and the saturation of entrepreneurship and CPG companies. So I would love to just close out with that question and any last thoughts. Jane, would love to start with you.
I can share a little bit of my journey because I think this is like my number one question that I get is how did you build your brand and how did you know that you're going to get to where you are? And I was like, I didn't. So, and I think it feeds back to the previous question of, do you keep your full-time job while you're building your business? And for me, I think year 1 through year 4 of A Taste of Cocoa, I didn't see this most certainly not as a business because nobody was blogging full-time at that time. No one knew that you could do that. Advertising as a whole, as an industry, would shift away from TV and print to working with, personalities and people who have Instagram followings. Like the industry has changed dramatically in this last 10 years. And for me, like I was working full time at a startup and that was, I had bills I needed to pay and I loved building the brand voice for the startup. But the reason why I left was the company told me I was a conflict of interest and said, we're not paying you to sit in the corner and work on your own thing. And I was like, okay, then I'm leaving because I put 80 hours in this company. And at that time, I would have loved to work for Facebook and Google. And I applied many times and I got rejected many times. And I think back to these situations quite often as like, A Taste of Cocoa would not be where it is right now if that startup didn't tell me that I was a conflict of interest and I would have left. I would not have put all of my time into building my personal brand if I had ended up getting hired by Facebook or Instagram or Google, like any of these big companies I would love to work for and be part of their mission. And it's because of that, I had to figure out a way to grow my brand. And the first major partnership I did through the blog when I was 25 was a 2-year contract with Carnival Cruise Line. Then IKEA sent me to LA to film an ad for the Oprah Winfrey Network. And in the last 5 years, I've worked with over 300 brands in every vertical on major advertising campaigns. And I think for me, when I think about that, is like remaining focused and really excelling in your niche, and then knowing that you can then take that, which I now realize when I say about the ecosystem is because I built such a strong foundation, I'm able to then just sprout up from that and be able to jump in when there's a crisis in the city and be able to raise $160,000 in 5 days, be able to launch D2C, which is what I did on my own with the book. And now with my ecosystem, I'm very focused on angel investing in CPG and hospitality brands because I am in a very unique position where I can potentially influence my investments. So I think following the last question is, are there some basic financial operational milestones that VCs and angel investors look for while investing? I'm pretty new to this space, but I think for me, I don't know maybe too much from like a financial and operational milestones, but for me, I'm more excited about how does a potential investment fit into my ecosystem? How can I influence? How can I help them grow and be part of their success? And that's what I look for when being pitched, a investment opportunity.
Great, thanks so much. Allison?
Okay, so I'm going to answer this question in a different way. So what I think, you've been hearing us touch on several, there's kind of recurring themes here: focus, finding your niche, developing your thought leadership. All of this requires a lot of thought. It requires a lot of thought, which requires clear headspace. And so what I recommend first and foremost is take care of yourself. Exercise, get sleep, eat well. And because you really need to be, and this is like my inner dietitian coming out here, but you really need to be taking care of your body in order to be able to really perform with the level of stress and demands that are going to be on you as a founder. And that's just bottom line. In order to have that clear headspace so you can think, so you can make decisions, so you can not get distracted, you have to be taking care of your body first. So make sure you're sleeping, exercising, and eating well.
Thanks, Allison. All right, Jennifer.
So what comes to mind, I wish someone would have told me, is really the idea of you can't do it all. Whether it's answering all the questions from your employees or from your team or from your investors or from your distributors or from your retailers, whatever it is, it's really accepting that at a certain point, it gets super hard because you're going to get flooded, and really picking and choosing and prioritizing what you're going to focus on or what you're going to work on, and be okay with there are certain things that are gonna either need to go to someone else to work on or address, or gonna fall by the wayside, and really being confident and comfortable in choosing what you're going to take on and what you're also not going to take on. You know, it's so easy if you get big opportunities or small opportunities, and a lot of them, to try and decide, oh, I want to do them all because they could all pay out. When in reality, as Allison said, giving yourself some time to step back. You know, in today's environment, whether it's Slack or texts or, you know, DMs, there's this need for instant response, when in reality, sometimes an instant response is actually not the best choice. And it's actually just taking a breath and then deciding, and also knowing, I know that this is my priority. These are the things I need to work on. And it's okay to shift, because your priorities are going to shift as things change, but just being mindful that I am making that shift and I am making the choice, and I'm going to focus on this and make sure either this gets taken care of by someone else, or we're going to stop doing it. Oftentimes, the biggest challenge I see is companies and founders trying to do too much, and then not all of it goes well, or none of it goes well. And so that's one of the things that I think is a big piece. And then as far as basic financial or operational milestones, it's two things. Do you have a clear set of milestones that are going to get you to some path to profitability? And if it's 3 or 5 years that you believe that's the case, then being open and transparent about it. And then the second thing is, are they realistic? Like, I can't tell you how many times someone has put in front of me a spreadsheet that says it's $150 billion market and I'm going to be a $1 billion business in 3 years. Like, okay, you're at 0 today, $1 billion in 3. I hope you get there, but it's not likely practical and realistic. And for me, that's a warning sign that this person may not really have in their mind what they need to do to even just become a $25 million or $50 million business, which is really that's the realistic number most times.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you all so much for participating. Really appreciate you spending time with us this morning. And I'll let Katrina take it away.
That was such an incredible conversation, and what an awesome way to kick off the day. I love that we landed on authentic relationships and building an ecosystem of support, because that is exactly what Naturally Austin is trying to cultivate and in service of our CPG community.